But I think I'll start out with how my intention was. It's my intention to ski the North Country Trail from the Mackinac Bridge to the Wisconsin border west of the Porcupine Mountains, 555 miles. I want to do something to note my 55th trip around the sun, and 555 miles seems fitting. I've never done a long-distance backcountry ski trek before. It should be an adventure. Why am I doing this? Because this is who I want to be, and to not do it with me, and I am no longer who I was. I'm doing it because it's challenging enough to test my mettle. I believe I have the skills and the experience to meet the challenge. One way or another, I'm going to go from believing to knowing. What do I get from it? I get long nights as alone as a person could be, no screens, convenience stores or cars, and no distractions from my thoughts. I want my thoughts to have a long stretch of quiet to arrange themselves in a way I can live with. Most of all, I get stories. All the old stories are getting dusty. Things I did back in the day. I need fresher stories. And so I did not really have a bunch of time to put thought into the planning. I ended up with the winter off from work right before Thanksgiving, and I first put my skis on the trail on Christmas Day. So, and in that meantime, I had to get all my equipment and just look at this North Country Trail map and think, gosh, I just really can't make sense of this. Where's all the resupply points? And how is somebody going to come get me? Where are the plowed roads? And so eventually I just gave up on worrying about that and figured I'd just figure it out when I got there. But so I got dropped off at the visitor center right at the Mackinac Bridge, and I skied out, and a quarter mile after skiing, I come to a stairway that's 80 steps high, and I'm like, oh gosh, I can't ski up the stairway. So I hadn't even went a quarter mile, and I had to take my skis off and hike up this stairway to the vista point, and well, it's not really very skiable. And then the trail went through St. Ignace, and I'm like, oh, I'm on sidewalks and roads. I'm like, this ain't very good on my skis. But it got better. It got better as I went. I got out of town, but there was really only about 1 inch of snow, and I skied out for one day to the Point Aux Chenes River on that 1 inch of snow, just thinking it might get better as I went north. And then that night it rained. In the morning, the snow was almost gone. I thought, oh, this is not good. So I just turned around, went back to St. Ignace, and I made it about halfway and had to take the skis off and just walk the last half back to St. Ignace and say, there's not enough snow to do this. So I went home and waited about a week and a half, and there still was no snow, and there's no snow in the, I like did not realize all these microclimates in the UP, like St. Ignace gets no snow. But eventually, I just said, to do this, I'm going to have to jump north. So I went about 25 miles north on the trail to where the trail crosses 123 north of Moran. And there was about 1 inch of snow there. And so I started there. And I got out and I got skiing down the trail, and I felt so good like I was going. And I stopped at the first creek, and I thought, let's see how long that took. And I went for my phone, and I don't got my phone. My phone is to take pictures and be in contact with everybody, but it's also my map. And I was like, oh, and it has my where I have to turn to get my resupply point. And so I was like, oh, so I turned around and I thought maybe my ride was waiting back and had realized I lost my phone, but she was not there. She went ahead to the next road crossing, but I did not go to the next road crossing. So I was without no map or anything. Well, I'm in the wilderness, and what do? You just adapt and move on. So luckily, the Hiawatha chapter marked their trails real well. I was able to go, and I remembered where I had to turn at 28 to go to Strong's Corners, and when I got there, someone let me use their phone, and I was able to reconnect and get back on track and try number 3. But so got dropped off and headed north, and things did start getting better because there was more snow. And eventually made it to Lake Superior, and that was a real high point, like, oh, I finally accomplished something. I crossed the whole UP in the shortest place possible. And but it was nice. The skiing along the lake I thought was going to like ahead of time, all this planning, I'm like, oh, but look at all these miles along Lake Superior. This is going to be brutal in the middle of winter because the wind and the gales and everything. And but I got along Lake Superior. It was great. There's this like 20-foot wall of ice out there, and it blew the wind right up over my head. And the snow on the beach was very skiable. The trail usually runs up on the back, the dunes a little bit, but I skied on the beach, and that was very nice skiing. And so then I got across, then you come to like the mouth of the Tequamanon River, and the goes back in, and then you're into the Tequamanon State Park along the river trail. And that ended up being brutal. So, and then coming into this, into the Tequamanon, one of my bindings on the ski started to malfunction, and it would not release. So I like got to the camp, and I had to unlace my boots to get my ski off. Oh, you know, equipment failure already. And so I called for a ride, and they were going to pick me up at the parking area at the Lower Falls. But that was 8 miles away, and it was the Whitefish Point, or Whitefish Peninsula gets a lot of snow. Like, so the snow along the river is about 4 foot deep, and the trail along the river is kind of up and down. And then on top of it, apparently they had a big storm in November, and so there was hundreds of trees down. And I come to every tree was like a different kind of puzzle. Like you go over, you go under, you go around, and I couldn't take my ski off to solve the puzzle for nothing. So it was a challenging day, very challenging. Like I guess they weren't expecting somebody to ski that trail, which happened over and over. But so I made it through that and went home and got my binding fixed, and got a ride back to the trail in a few days. So try number 4, and headed north from the falls through the state park, and eventually come back out to Lake Superior by the Two-Hearted River. And once again, I had this sense of accomplishment, like, oh, you skied across the Whitefish Peninsula. Snow was deep there, so that was a big accomplishment. I was feeling a little bit better about it. And skied into Grand Marais, and that was a good experience. I stayed at this, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Grand Marais, but it's like a little town that looks like you stepped 100 years back in time when you get there. And I stayed at this hotel that looked like it comes straight out of an old Western movie, you know, with a big false front, the Superior Hotel. And Rick and Mary owned it, and I went in, and I was like, oh man, these people collect antiques. There's all kinds of old stuff in here. But by the time I sat and talked to Rick for a while, Rick's like, oh yeah, I was born here, you know, just down the road. My brother was born up in room 7. My parents ran this hotel before me, and my grandparents started it back in the 30s. And I'm like, oh, all these antiques just been sitting here. So you didn't collect anything, you just moved in. And it was a really nice place, and they were good people. And there was a old man sitting in the parlor when I come in there, and he was watching the TV, and when we went by, and Mary's like, turn it down 2 clicks, and he kind of turned it down. But when I carried my skis in, the old man's like, oh, you're a skier, and he wanted to talk. His name was Brian. Old man Brian, I called him. But old man Brian was full of a lot of good advice, because old man Brian had been in the ski patrol in the Army back in Europe in the 50s. And he's like, oh yeah, you get in the dunes, and you gotta stop a lot, and you gotta look, and you gotta say, is that a dune, or is that a drift, or is that a buried bush, or is that exposed dirt? And he says, me and my friends, we'd stop at the top of every dune and just analyze for 10 minutes before we'd make a rundown. And we'd do it all in our head before we did it. And he said, I call that analytic skiing. I'm like, okay, sounds good, Brian. I said, I've been through the dunes. I've seen what you're talking about. It makes a lot of sense to me. And the other thing he said, he told me a long story about he had an operation in Europe where they gave him a shot of adrenaline. And when they gave him the shot of adrenaline, he realized what adrenaline felt like. And he says, you have to be very wary of adrenaline, because adrenaline will make you brave, but it will make you foolhardy too. And I was like, oh, I know this. I'm an adrenaline junkie. But so that was all good advice. And he's like, well, are you taking the ski trail to Munising? I said, no, I'm skiing through Pictured Rocks. He's like, oh, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Because those trails aren't marked. And he says, you can't even take a snowmobile in to rescue you if you're in Pictured Rocks and get hurt because without permission from the park. And he says, you need to have 3 people to go through there. You got someone with you? I said, no, I'm on my own. He said, oh, no, don't do this. That's a real bad idea. But I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. But anyway, Pictured Rocks was kind of challenging. And there, I don't know, there was a lot of stairs in Pictured Rocks I had to take the skis off for. And there was a lot of places where I'd be looking down 300 feet, wondering if I should be skiing there. But it was kind of rewarding too. I don't know, maybe I'll read it, something from my journal. Um, Shortly after I left my campsite, I spooked a big deer. She had been digging through the 3-foot deep snow for forage. It didn't take long to find the trail I'd lost last night and return to the North Country Trail. The trail crossed Beaver Creek. I was excited to get water. I was still thirsty from last night. There was a lot of ice along the stream and a mass of ice-encrusted driftwood that had been pushed into the stream by the wave action of the lake. I made my way on the icy driftwood to a spot I could dip water. I tested the ice with a stomp of my right foot, and the entire ice shelf I was standing on collapsed with a crash. I grabbed for a down log and jerked my feet up. I landed on a log under the ice. The water was about 2 feet below. Luckily, my feet didn't go in the water. My ears started ringing from the adrenaline. I was fine. I laid on my belly over the icy driftwood log and reached down to dip water. The first quart I drank. The second quart I filled a water bottle and hung it around my neck inside my jacket to keep from freezing. To get across the creek, I had to descend a steep bank to a questionable-looking bridge with no handrails. I took my skis off to be safe. I had to take my skis off more times than I could count today. The trail was a bit hard to follow due to all the drifts. Some of the drifts were taller than I was. I had to ski around them. Skiing around them was tricky because there was a lot of undergrowth off the trail. Last night's wind had faded to a gentle breeze. That was good because the bank continued to get taller, and there was no more skiing on the beach. The cliff trail overlooked Lake Superior. In most places, there were no trees between the trail and the edge of the cliff. In places, there were drifts, and in others, the wind had swept the snow away, exposing sand, rock, and gravel. The trail climbed 300 foot above the waters at the coves. It was a little scary skiing inches away from a cliff that dropped to the icy water so far below. Where the wind had cleared away the snow, I had to take the skis off and walk. Looking down from the cove rim, there were shoulder-to-shoulder ice boulders bobbing on the gentle waves. The waves would come in from the lake and rebound off the cliffs, so the waves moved in many directions at once. The entire surface of the lake for a quarter-mile out was floating ice balls moving in strange patterns. Cliffs continued to grow. Icicles hung from the faces of the rocks. Some of the icicles were 100 foot tall. Many of them were baby blue. Near Chapel Rock Beach, there was a wall of icicles of many shades and colors. Some were orange, some clear, some blue. A few of them looked as if they had been braided, and in places the wind had blown them to look like feathers. Some cliffs were completely encased in ice. As I neared the Chapel Rock Formation, the light breeze settled to perfect stillness. The goddess parted her cloak, and the clouds let the sun shine brightly on this marvelous piece of nature. I felt like I had been tested and found worthy to take in the wonder of this awe-inspiring place. The chapel, as the French explorers called it, was a tall formation of weathered sandstone and limestone that stood like a tower over the waves below. Every bit of it was intricately carved by eons of wind and waves. There were huge openings in the sandstone that supported a solid limestone cap. On top of the formation grew a lone white pine. Its branches and roots gnarled from the effort to survive. Very little topsoil rested on the rock. The pine was connected to the cliff by a rope of roots, bringing it nutrients. I couldn't help but marvel at its tenacity to live. So as hard as the whole trip was, there was like a lot of moments of beauty in it too. I think it stopped, didn't it?
You're good.
Am I okay? Um, so I continued on, and there was more challenges through Pictured Rocks, but I made it through the Pictured Rocks and come out to the other end. And there was a visitor center, and then right across the street was an urgent care center. I thought, well, that would have been convenient. But then the road went for 2.5 miles along the highway to Munising, and I walked the first about half mile or quarter mile, and it's like, oh gosh, there's car fumes and dryer fumes and fuel oil fumes and asphalt fumes and snowmobile fumes, and I was like, this place is terrible. I'm walking on the road next to a bank, and I come to a kind of hotel, and I was looking past at this big bay behind it, so I just cut through the hotel and put my skis on and skied across the bay to Munising. That was a good decision. I may not have been on the North Country Trail that went on the road, but I was getting to the same location, which is choices I had to make a lot of times, because a lot of times the trail wasn't really the ideal place. And sometimes I had to decide between skiing and trail. And skiing ended up being the more important part of the journey, I think. But Munising was great because Munising was really the first place that I met anybody from any of the chapters. And I met Barb Ism and Charlie Todd. Charlie Todd is the president of the Shoreline chapter of the North Country Trail Association. And Barb helped get me some hotel reservations and, sort that out. And they took me out to dinner, and they were just wonderful people. I feel like I met some friends. And they helped me out and gave me a lot of advice on what was coming up and gave me a ride back to the trailhead when it was time to go. And that was opened my eyes to how much assistance was available out here in the chapters. And Barb contacted the chapters ahead, and pretty soon I had Lynn Thomas from the Marquette chapter contacting me and make sure you come see us when you get here. And that's how I come in contact with Connie Julian through that. And once I got into that loop, the whole trip started to make a little more sense. So that was good. But as much as that helped, it didn't help one bit when I got out on the trail, because the snow was still 5 foot deep, and there was this thin little crust on it, and it was breaking through. So it's like you try to get up on top, and you might be lucky and be up there for a step or two, and then poof, you fell through the floor, and then the snow's up to your thighs again, and your poles are sinking. Even if you're up on the snow, your pole is sinking down to here, and it was very challenging. And that was like a section of trail that no one goes out and does in the winter. Some places snowshoers would help me out and break trail, but between Munising and Marquette, no such luck. So I spent about 2 days just busting trail, and just really wearing myself out to exhaustion doing it. But I come out to a snowmobile trail, and that was like a blessing when some snowmobile ran on the trail. And a lot of places, the North Country Trail and the snowmobile trails run together. Like over by Tequamanon, there's about 7 miles of snowmobile trail. That maybe in the summer that's great hiking, but in the winter they don't expect anybody to be out there. And in the winter it's a snowmobile trail. But so I'm on the snowmobile trail, and I'm liking it a lot. And then a snowmobile's coming, and I'm like, oh, I'll get off to the side to try to be polite. And they just stopped, and they started trimming some branches. I thought, oh, that's weird. So I just skied up, and then got to talking to them. And there's Angela and Mike, and they were out pruning the trail for the UP 200 sled dog race, and they were grooming trail as they went. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to try and be out of here before the dogs come. And they're like, don't worry about it. You're welcome on the trail there. You're not going to have any problems. And Mike's like, I've just groomed the trail from here all the way to Marquette. Why don't you just stay on the dog sled trail all the way to Marquette? And the dog sled trail runs on the North Country Trail for a large section. And then where it doesn't run on the North Country Trail, it parallels the North Country Trail. So I got on that dog sled trail, and oh my gosh, after like 2 days of busting trail, this was like heaven. This was the best skiing I'd seen yet. After like weeks of breaking my, really busting myself up, all of a sudden I was just skiing. I was like, oh, I love to ski. This is why I came out here, because I love to ski. And it was really interesting being out on the dog sled trail, uh, seeing what these mushers see, because I ended up watching the start of the race while I was in Marquette, and there's 5,000 people in the streets of Marquette to watch the start of this race, and then people line the road crossings to cheer the mushers on. But I'm out where the dogs are, in between, where no one's watching them, and I know when I watched the start of that sled dog race, these dogs just wanted to run. There was nothing. These dogs wanted to do more than run. And I was like hundreds of miles of running, and I knew they run to exhaustion, but the exhaustion was what brought them joy. And I was like, I can relate to these dogs, Wama. And so Marquette was a good town, and they helped me out a lot. And I met a lot of really good people there. Um, and so Lynn Thomas, who's the president of the Marquette chapter, she's like, you've skied from St. Ignace to Marquette. No one has ever done that. And I'm like, oh, well, that's only half of what I really set out to do. She said, yeah, but you've done the easy half. Now the next half is the hard half. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. How much harder can it be than, the Tequamanon Trail with hundreds of trees down and 5 foot of snow? And they're like, oh, well, the McCormick Wilderness is not marked, and the Huron Mountains are, super steep, and the resupply is, no one can get to you. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess give it a try and see what happens. But let's see. So leaving Marquette was good because there was Sugarloaf Mountain and Hogback Mountain and Wetmore Landing, and those were all beautiful. And then the Little Garlic River and up to the Little Garlic Falls, but like the falls, I can't even see the falls because they're all frozen over. That was pretty much the whole story until I get to your section. Then the spring melt come, and then I could start to see amazing falls that were just overflowing with water. But the falls all through the center were just all frozen. Let's see, but the Huron Mountains were tall. Here, I'll kind of tell you what I wrote about them when I went through it. The trail followed a very steep rocky ridge. It was imposing. The trail turned and headed up the face of the ridge. I put the climbing skins on my skis. The ridge climbed 300 feet in elevation in just over a quarter mile. It was steep. With the skins on, I marched right up. I was determined to do the entire climb without stopping. The part I was marching up, though, was really just the approach. After the second switchback, it got more difficult. The snow was 3 to 4 foot deep. When I tried to make the almost 180-degree turn at the switchback, the tails of my skis broke through all the way to the ground, with the tips almost straight up. My poles sunk to the grips. Just trying to pull the skis out of the deep snow to get back on top was super challenging. I was learning. I learned to take the corners wide. I avoided the straight ups if I could. I learned to lean way over the tips and get up on my toes to force the front of the skis into the snow and try to keep the tails from bottoming. If I leaned too far forward, I slid back. If I leaned too far back, my tail sunk. There were dozens of switchbacks to practice on. I hardly rested. One time my ski slid back and I fell forward. Without my skis under me, I quickly sank 3 foot into the snow. Without the skis under me, I was nearly helpless. That little fall wasn't bad. It was a warning. I was able to quickly get my skis under me again. The cliff I was making my way up was beautiful. There were ledges of barren stone, huge trees, and mounds of pristine white snow. It reminded me of the Appalachian Mountains. I had found a Michigan mountain range, the Huron Mountains. As much work as it was climbing, I still enjoyed the splendor and the challenge. It took an hour to make it up the quarter mile. I expected a vista at the top, but it was just pine trees and snow. I took the skins off. The trail went gently down slope. The snow may have been deeper on the plateau. I was back to breaking trail. There was no likely end to the trail breaking based on the map. And that was the very first climb of the Huron Mountains, and I did that for the next 4 days, I guess. But and so the next day after this, through the Huron Mountains, I skied for 9 hours nonstop, and I made 4 miles. But the day after that, I skied up and made 4 more. So things were getting challenging. That like created all new challenges, because now when you only ski 4 miles a day, it's hard to find water. And the temperature had dropped to around 0 at this point. And so it was very cold, and everything was frozen, and I really was down to mostly having to melt snow every night for water. And that took up a lot of fuel. So, I kind of kept it to a minimum. And I think I was probably running myself on the edge of dehydration most of the time. But come to after the Huron Mountains, or I guess it's probably still part of the Huron Mountains, but coming out of the Huron Mountains, come to the McCormick Wilderness, and I'd been warned about this, that there's no blazes in the McCormick Wilderness. Michael Seckley and Marquette, who's a trail angel, he had told me when they're doing their trail maintenance out there, they cannot even use a chainsaw to do their maintenance. They have to bring a 2-man crosscut saw to cut any trees out of the way. So I was like, oh, there's probably going to be very minimal maintenance if you got to do it by hand. And got there, and there was a kiosk, and it looked like a trail, and I headed off for about 100 yards, and I said, it's not really looking like trail. So I got my Avenza out, and my Avenza said the trail was 100 feet to the north of me, so I busted through a bunch of branches and stuff, and about 100 feet north, and I'm like, gosh, and so I checked the map again, and now the trail is 100 foot to the northwest of me. And I'm like, oh gosh, so I busted through a whole bunch of branches, and I was still not to the trail. The trail kept on, like, it must have been going just the same way I was going, because it never got any closer. And for 45 minutes, I just started, eventually, like, I'm just going to go in a straight line until I cross something that looks like a trail. 45 minutes, I was busting through brush, and I finally come out to what looked like a trail, and I looked at the Avenza, and I was on the trail. And but after that initial struggle, I followed the trail pretty easily. I watched for where the branches were trimmed on the side of a pine tree, or where a log had been cut. And after being out where the trail wasn't, I got a pretty good idea of what not trail looked like. So if I got off the trail, I could recognize it. But the water didn't get any better, and at one point I was all out of water, and the only water I saw was coming straight out of the beaver pond by the moose tracks, and I was like, oh, well, I'll take this because I got water, and I'll just make sure I boil it when I get to camp. So I got water, and I packed it to camp that night, and that night I made it to the highest point in Marquette County, which is this. And in the winter, it's kind of nice. In the summer, I don't know what it looked like because it'd be all trees. But in the winter, it was up there. It goes down on every side, and you can kind of see through the trees, and you got a little bit of a vista. It was kind of a nice place to camp. And I boiled a quart of water, and the first quart of water I make my breakfast with. I put my oatmeal and raisins and whatnot in the water bottle and pour the boiling water in there and seal it up, and I'll put it in the foot of my sleeping bag to keep my feet warm at night. And then in the morning, I just drink it. But so then I cooked the second quart of water and to cook my dinner with, and about halfway through, my fuel ran out because I'd been melting so much snow. And I was like, oh, this water is kind of like lukewarm, enough to like get the potatoes mushy, and but the ramen noodles were still crunchy. Well, whatever. So I drank it or ate my dinner and went on. And then the next day, I had a food drop at the parking area of the McCormick Wilderness. So I had a new fuel canister and food and everything. And then I continued on towards Craig Lake State Park. Wasn't feeling real good. And my left arm had started to get all numb and cold, and it got chilled faster than the rest of me, and my left foot was getting chilled faster than the rest of me. And I had this like big pressure building up underneath my ribs, and I was really short on energy, and I was kind of exhausted, and my uncle had had a heart attack the summer before, and he just thought it was long haulers from COVID and didn't do anything and did long-term damage to his heart. And I kind of was getting worried. And so I thought, well, there's cabins in a year at Craig Lake, and maybe I can get to the parking area. I figured the parking area was plowed, and I could call somebody from the chapter or something to maybe take me to urgent care to get checked out. But I got to the Craig Lake after like, there was like a blizzard that day too, and I was trying really hard not to like get my heart rate up too much, but the snow was getting deeper, and I skied across Craig Lake. That was a good decision again. That was way better than skiing in the woods. But I got to where the parking area was, and there was no plowed parking area. There was just a snowmobile trail that comes up to Craig Lake in the winter. So I made that really the hardest thing probably the whole trip was to take out my phone and call 911. They sent an EMT on a snowmobile to get me, and took me to Marquette, and they checked me all out, and they said I was fine. My heart, hadn't had no heart attack, so that was all good news. I hadn't had a stroke, and they have no idea why my stomach's upset and or why my arm's numb, but I'm healthy and go home, get some rest. And so at that point, my mom and all these other hundreds of new friends I had on Facebook are all like, you've done quite an accomplishment already, and this is a good place to call it done. That seemed to be the general consensus, but I was just, it was looking like nice weather out, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I just really could not. So the next day after the emergency visit, I talked to a doctor, and they decided I had Giardia, beaver fever. Yeah. They gave me a big dose of antibiotics, and I started feeling better pretty much right away. And so I didn't want to end on the couch, and I thought, I just want to go back and finish the section to Lance. I want to be into the Peter Wolfe section and just give it a try. And I'd kind of gave up on completing the journey, and I stopped thinking about Wisconsin. Just thought about if I could just make it to the next resupply, I could walk away from it feeling a little better about it. So I continued on and made it past Craig Lake, and then I was to the Peter Wolfe Chapter, and I had to back up and start at McCormick because that's the only place to get dropped off, so it was 2 or 3 days in. And then coming out of Craig Lake, headed towards the Lynch shelter, it started to snow. So I had skied most of the day. It was 3:30. The Lynch hiker shelter was 4 miles up the trail. I really wanted to make it there. I had plenty of energy. The trail continued to run on logging roads. If the trail continued to run on logging roads, I thought I could make it by 6 o'clock. It's getting dark about 6:30. Realistically, it might take me till 7:30. Even if I had to ski by headlight, it seemed better to be in a shelter with 3 walls and a roof than setting my tent up in fresh powder that was still coming down and fighting the gusting wind. I picked up the pace. The logging road ran for about 1 more mile. Then the trail took to the woods. The snow in the woods did not hold my weight, and I was breaking through. There were lots of ups and downs. I put the climbing skins back on. I made steady progress. When I could get on top of the snow, I almost jogged. The rest of the time, I just kept moving. The trail was mostly marked with blue ribbons. There were very few painted blazes. The snow built up more on the trees and rocks. The pines were completely encased in powdery whiteness. The light got fainter and the gray sky started to darken. I still had 1.5 miles to go. I pushed on. The blue blazes were partially covered in snow and difficult to see. I watched for pines that were trimmed on one side and a lack of underbrush to find the trail. The snow and the wind increased as I continued. I was now skiing in a blizzard. At one point, the trail came to a cliff and seemed to end. It hardly made sense, but it seemed that the trail went up the cliff. There was a snowdrift against the cliff. Perhaps it was hiding some steps. I took off my skis and kicked steps into the snow and climbed the 4-foot rise. The trail continued on. I had to turn on my headlight. The snow was coming down heavily and reflected the light back at me. My progress slowed. as I had to concentrate to find every yard of trail. After more than an hour of finding trail in the dark, I came to the shelter. It was 8:30 p.m. It was the first time I had skied after sunset, and 13 hours of skiing was my longest day on the trail. I'd covered 11 miles. But I was very happy to have that shelter to come to. That this blizzard continued through the night, and by morning it had dropped over 2 foot of fresh snow. So when I headed out, I was like, how am I even going to find the trail? Because all the branches were down like this, and when you're on top of 4 foot of snow, the blazes are already at waist high. And so now all the snow was plastered to the trees, but I just started picking my way through it, and it was so beautiful. It was like just skiing through clouds, really. If I could just get past the exertion it took to get. But so I made it out of the woods and come out to a road, maybe Little Spruce Pond Road or something like that.
Spruce Lake Road.
There you go, Little Spruce Lake Road. Yep. And and it was sunny, and after the blizzard it was just like bright blue skies, which made all the white powdery stuff just sparkle. And I was like, I was skiing pretty good. I was like snow plowing up to my knees, but it was better than breaking through. It was, just a little bit more weight to push through. But as the sun continued out, the snow started to warm, and then it started to get sticky, and the snow was sticking to my skis. And so I'd had to stop, and I got some liquid wax, and I waxed my skis. And first I waxed my skis, and I went a half mile, and then I waxed my skis and went a quarter mile, and then I waxed my skis and went 100 yards. And oh gosh, I was really getting frustrated. And I had miles of this ahead of me yet, and I was on the side of the trail trying to get a real good wax on, and some snowmobiles were coming up the trail. And so I got off a little further to make room for them. And they come up and they stopped because they were like, I think, what's this guy doing out in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard? The after effects of a blizzard. And it looks like he's been here for a minute. And so I talked to them, and they were from around there, and they were real nice guys. And they're like, "Oh, where'd you park your car? And where are you getting off? And where'd you sleep last night?" And I was like, I started in St. Ignace, and they're like, "Oh, okay." And the guy, the last thing he said, he looked up at me, he says, "Right now you are every man's hero." Well, thanks, man. But these guys were my heroes because they had come right where I was going, and the next 3.5 miles were all packed trail. And I was like, that was great. It was like the universe kept on giving me nice little things like that to happen. So continued on from there through your section, and well, then next I must have come to the trail along the Sturgeon River, and that was just a super picturesque up on the high cliffs looking down at the river, and I was like, this is super beautiful. But then the trail dropped down to right along the river, and then all the tag alders were weighted down with the snow from the blizzard, and there was no trail. And I tried skiing around them, but they're all in swamps, and there's like no skiing around them. And then you all got a lot of little narrow bridges that are great to walk across in the summer, but when you get 3 foot of snow on a little narrow bridge, it makes skiing across it challenging. So then I had to abandon the trail by the river and go out and ski on the road, parallel with you anyway. And that wasn't too bad. So I skied along there until I come to the Humpback Bridge, and able to ski. From after the Humpback Bridge, I was able to ski along the river again. That was better. And come into Lance, and Linda Zimmer gave me some help and picked me up and took me grocery shopping. And Brian Saylor picked me up and gave me a ride to Lance. And so it was a real good stop there. And I met more good people that were so happy to help me, and I was so happy to get helped. And, I thought maybe I was just going to try to go to Lance, but after everybody wanted to help me resupply and get going, I was like, gosh, I guess maybe I'll better go do another section. I was kind of looking forward to seeing the Canyon Falls anyway, and the Canyon Falls end up being, the best waterfall I'd seen since I'd left Quamanon Falls. And the trail along the Canyon Falls, or the Sturgeon River, I guess, was really quite picturesque also. And there was a lot of snowshoers there, so the trail was all packed down until I crossed the Plumbago Creek, I guess. And then the snowshoer stopped and I was back to breaking trail. But I was used to it. I've been breaking trail all across the UP. And then the trail popped out on the Baraga Plains, and oh, that was good. Oh, did I first stop at the Oran Crumb Shelter before I get to the Baraga Plains? I'll get it mixed up. The Oran Crumb Shelter was great. Skiing along the Sturgeon River before I come there. I've been having visits from ravens and eagles all along the trip. There was really no songbirds or anything through the winter, but a pair of ravens just seemed to follow me the whole trip. I'm sure it was new ravens every day, but it felt like the same two ravens the whole way. And this raven way up in a tall white pine started cawing and making a huge racket. And I thought, you know, you're awful worried about me. But then I come around the corner and I see out on the ice is this deer carcass just surrounded with blood. Must have been a wolf kill. And the ravens were down there feeding. And when the raven had given the warning, all the other ravens kind of flew up. And I was like, oh, ravens, they're... But so I come to the Oran Crumb, and that was very nice because I got there at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is like I started to feel a little bit guilty about stopping with, you know, 3 or 4 hours of daylight yet. But I thought, that's okay. You're not in a hurry anymore, and you're just trying to enjoy every day. And there I was able to do what I wasn't able to do at the Lynch shelter because I got there so late, was just sit down in the sun and read all these old trail registers. So many people, it's like, it really makes you think, you know, when people are out in the woods, it seems to make them better people, you know, and no one's talking about any frustrations. They're all just talking about how wonderful of an experience they're having. And that's how I felt when I was out there too. So left there, and the skiing just kept getting better because that sunshine that I'd run into just continued on, and the temperatures kept warming up, and pretty soon I'm out there skiing with no shirt on or anything, and it's like the snow is packing down, so this, even if I'm breaking through, I'm not breaking through 3 foot of snow. And when there's a certain melting point where the water in the snow kind of works like a lubricant, and you just fly right over it. And come out to the Baraga Plains, and I was like, oh, this is the total opposite of the Huron Mountains. This is great. It was all very flat and very good skiing, and ran on a lot of 2-tracks and stuff. And so that was good. But as I kind of got past the Baraga Plains, I saw the end result was that all the tops of the mountains and the tops of the cliffs and the escarpments were starting to get bare, and they weren't having any snow on them at all. And so I'd say I got past the Ontonagon River, and I've come to Silver Creek. And I know Russ Heathman had told me that there was some fords, but, well, here, I'll just read my journal entry. That tells it all. When the trail came to the Silver River, I was dumbfounded. The trail clearly ran right to the bank and picked up on the other side, but there was no bridge. This was the ford Russ had told me about a month ago, the ford I doubted I would ever make it to. He said in the summer people just skipped across the boulders that were sticking up where the trail crossed. He thought the river would probably be frozen and I could ski across in the same place. I could just see the boulders in the muddy snowmelt water. They were at least a foot underneath the surface, and the current was so fast that it was rippling over where they were. I walked downriver looking for a log or anything to cross on. I didn't want to strip from the waist down and try skipping across the submerged boulders. That seemed dangerous. There was nothing downstream to cross on. I looked at the map to see if there was a road I could go back to that would get me across. There wasn't. I skied upstream and found a big cedar tree that had fallen across the river. I remembered Russ had said there was a log I might be able to cross on. The cedar log had a 3-foot cornice of snow on it. It was not safe to cross like that. I went further upstream and found nothing. The best plan I could come up with was I was going to have to clear the snow from the log to cross it. I found a stick and tried moving some of the snow. It was frozen hard like ice. I needed a better stick. There was no point in rushing this. clearing the log of frozen snow was dangerous. I got my snow pants out of my pack and put them on along with my more water-resistant glove liners and my jacket shell. I did not want to be dainty out on the log. I was going to have to hold on with my knees and dig with my hands at times. I unclipped the Zoleo. Oh, the Zoleo is a GPS tracking device, a satellite device, and Brad Slagle and Marquette had insisted I take this with me in case I have an emergency. I took it from the pack and clipped it to my suspenders. If I went in, it should be with me. I skied around looking for a good shovel. I found a rotted, hollow cedar that I broke apart and brought back 4 pieces that were 2 to 4 feet long, 6 to 12 inches wide, and about 1 inch thick. I cleared the snow from the base of the tree and root ball where the tree had fallen over. There were several holes in the roots that could be fallen through, and I wanted to expose them all. Once I was to the trunk of the tree, I carved off blocks about 3 foot by 3 foot and pried them free of the log. They fell 4 feet into the river below with a satisfying splash. I lost a couple shovels when they went over with the block. I didn't try to catch them. The snow was very dense and it was hard work carving it free. It took an hour to clear the log of snow. I was very relieved to step off the log on the far bank. I used my last shovel like an axe to break off any branches that might snag my gear as I brought it across. After all the hard work of clearing the log and the danger of following a chunk of snow into the river, crossing now was like walking across a bridge. Russ was right. First I carried my skis across, then I carried my poles across, and finally I went for my pack. I made sure the waterproof bag inside was shut tight. I cinched all the straps tight and made sure nothing was dangling. Most important, I loosened the shoulder straps and did not buckle the hip belt or chest strap. If I fell, I wanted the pack to come off, not flip me face down into the water. I carried the heavy pack across without any problems. The entire crossing had taken an hour and 15 minutes. The moose tracks picked right back up on the other side. A quarter mile further, and the trail came to Boulder Creek. There was no bridge over there either. Russ had made the creek sound inconsequential and thought it would be frozen over. It might have been last week, but now it was raging. I couldn't see the bottom where I was supposed to ford. I was strongly considering dropping the pants and wading across. I stuck a stick in the near bank, and it was 3 foot deep, and the current pulled the stick out of my hand. I went up and downstream looking for a log to cross. The only log was a cedar about 10 inches thick and only 12 inches above the water. It had several feet of snow on it. I didn't like it. I thought for a bit. My best idea was to build a bridge. I searched the woods and found a couple of logs that weren't frozen down. I carried them to the creek and laid them alongside the low log that spanned the creek. That gave me enough support to shimmy out and clear the snow. My foot slipped and splashed into the creek, but I pulled it up before it got wet. All 3 of the logs were a bit shaky, but by keeping my hands on the 2 logs I had added and my knees and ankles on the log that was there, I was able to make it to the other bank. I crossed back and prepared my pack. I was going to do it in one trip, so I strapped my poles and skis to the pack. The skis stuck out 1.5 feet over and below the pack. I had to keep that in mind. I had made it halfway across smoothly when the log on my right shifted, and I fell to the left. Somehow I was able to arrest the fall. I was leaning way over to the left, barely on the log, about 1 inch above the water. I froze there, not wanting to make a wrong move. My thighs, ankles, hands, and elbows all clinched the log with as much force as I could exert. Slowly and deliberately, I pulled myself back onto the log. It took a lot of strength. The pack was heavy, and it was off-center and not strapped to me. Once I was upright, I had to move 3 more feet to be across this creek. I now only had the log on my left to balance with. I did not rush. I let out a huge breath I had been holding when I stepped off the log on the other side of the creek. It had taken me 45 minutes to get across. It was 7 p.m. I set up my tent on the snow just up on the bank. I got water from the creek to cook dinner. I can hear the overfull creek babbling loudly while I lay in my sleeping bag. It's beautiful music. I slept soundly and had several good dreams. So the the spring melt continued from there. Uh, it was like every creek I came to was full and rushing, but a lot of them had snow bridges over them, and I was just kept skiing over the snow bridges. I kept thinking eventually these snow bridges are going to cave in and I'm going to fall in, but they never did. It was a good timing for that, and I was able to make it all the way as almost to Okundikun Falls. I think it's Lumbago Creek or something right before the falls. I, I pretty much could not find a way across, and I thought I would just ford it and get cold. And but I thought I didn't want to slip, so I started laying brush down to give me some traction. By the time I laid all the brush down, I found a big old pine branch. I laid that on top, and I thought, well, now I got a bridge. So I had a brush bridge across Lumbago Creek, and crossed that and come to Okundikun Falls, which were super beautiful, and spent the night there. And it was the full moon, night of the full moon, and I camped right on the shore, and there was a blood moon coming up. And then that night there was a lunar eclipse, and so I kind of stuck my head out in the middle of the night to see the lunar eclipse. But all this snow, all this trail I've been busting, and these rivers I've been fording, and this slushy snow that's got me soaking wet, and it's all brought me to this place, and that place was very, very beautiful, and I felt like I'd earned it. So from Okundikun Falls, I had to go to Rockland because they're letting water out of the Victoria Dam, and so I had to take the bypass. Took this ski trail that run along, was it 45 there, to Rockland, and the ski trail ended up being a pretty nice choice. Where it ran right along the road was they had thrown a lot of salt and gravel and stuff in it, but then the trail veers off from the road and goes back into the trees a little, and that was pretty nice skiing. Would think if anybody was taking the bypass, they should try to. Way better than walking along the highway. They come up to, I don't remember, was it 26 that turns and goes into Rockland? But instead of taking that, there was another ski trail, and it was a little offshoot of the main ski trail that took me right up to the Welcome to Rockland sign about right outside of town. So that was good skiing, and it was only when I got to town I had to take the skis off and go in. And I had another good town stop at Rockland, and they only just got a little store there, but they had everything I needed to supply with, and I ended up renting a house trailer for the whole week for 2 days, and it was set up for like about a dozen people, and this mostly set up for snowmobilers, but snowmobile season had now come to an end with the snow melt, so I had this whole house trailer to myself for the weekend, and got some good food at Henry's Never End, and then headed out. But when I headed out on the snowmobile trail towards Victoria, but all the melt had gone, so now it was just an ice trail. It was like ice skating on the snowmobile trail, which was eventually, so I had to take my skis off a lot and walk just because you can't ski on the ice trail. Come to Victoria, and that was real nice with the old town site there and the shelter. But leaving was the Trap Hills were next, and I had already, what I had seen is the tops of all the hills are bare, and any place where there's solid rock was ice. Any place where there was a creek was 3 times as full as what it normally was. Did not think that the Trap Hills were going to be. So I took Victoria Road around the Trap Hills. And the Victoria Road ended up being the best skiing I'd had ever since the dog sled trail. And that was so great. I did 27 miles in 1 day on the Victoria Road, and I made it almost to Berglund. I probably could have made it to Berglund, but I didn't want to get there at night. And it was such a beautiful day of skiing after going through all these rough trail that was not made for skiing. I got on a snowmobile trail, and I had a good time. Russ Heathman helped me out and supplied me and took me out to the trailhead on 64. And then I was back in the woods, and there was pretty good still snow there, and come up to the Porcupine Mountains. And once again, I was looking at the trail, when I got to the south boundary, and I know it runs on the escarpment trail, which is going to be all bare rock, and because I've hiked these trails before in the summer in the Porcupines, I kind of knew what they consisted of. Um, so I decided to take the south boundary road, and that was real good skiing too. So I skied on the whole south boundary road to the other end of the park, but where I had started and there was snow, as I got to the other end of the park, there was no more snow. And no, it's not the Black River, but whatever the river at the end of the park was. Presque Isle River, thank you. Black River is the next one. So the Presque Isle River, the bridge over that was where the snow stopped. And I crossed, and I had to take the skis off and put them on the pack and start hiking. And then there was spotty snow, and I was like, I'm going to get every bit of snow I can. So I ended up carrying the skis, and I ski for 80 yards and walk for 50 yards and ski for 10 yards and walk for 20 yards. And then there's a cut across trail, and that was terrible skiing. That goes from the Porcupine Mountains to the Black River recreation area. It was an old road, but all the culverts and streams were washed out. It looked like it'd been like that forever. We're past your chapter now, so I don't know why they let it stay like that. But and so that was really terrible skiing. And then it was just no snow at all. So I was walking, and then there's a huge 29-mile road walk to get you to the end of the state. And I pretty much I skied in the ditch on some of that, but I had to walk a lot of it. And there's a trail angel there, Bethany Thomas. She is the president of the Heritage Chapter, which is the first chapter in Wisconsin. I stayed at her house, and then she gave me a ride to the trailhead the next day, where there actually was trail right at the very end, the last 10 miles or so, our trail. And went up to this place called Bald Mountain, which was very meaningful to me because I own a piece of property back home called Bald Mountain. And that's where I went out and tested my gear the day before I came to the trail. And now I'm the last day on the trail, and I'm back on a Bald Mountain. But from Bald Mountain down to the Montreal River was all. I just had to strap my skis to my pack and hike, because I'd been racing spring for the last 2 weeks, and when I come down to the last 3 miles of trail, I guess spring had won out. And I actually finished on the March 20th, which was the spring equinox. So I hiked, and I saw the bridge over the Montreal River, and that had been my destination all along. I started walking real slow, and I didn't even know if I wanted the journey to be done. I didn't know what I was going to do next, and I kept on going slower. And then I kind of heard the voice in my head said, "Don't slow down, you're not there yet." And I put my head up, and I strode right across like I was a warrior, and I was in Wisconsin.
Would you mind if we asked you some questions?
That'd be great. And I don't know, I didn't, maybe y'all were watching the pictures. I wasn't watching the pictures. I hope they worked for you.
It's pictures.
Yeah. So you got to carry a lot more gear in the winter. And my pack, when I took off, was 55 pounds.
It's 5.
And there was times I think it was probably 60 when was full of water and food.
Did you get your binding fixed?
So I got my binding fixed. I actually just went and my skis weren't doing so good, and I went down and got a whole new pair of skis and a new pair of bindings, and that worked. But ended up being, my binding was not broken. My binding was frozen, and but I still got new bindings, and they ended up malfunctioning again with the same thing. But now I knew they were frozen, and I could deal with it a little bit better. Yeah.
How many times did you eat a day? I mean,
amazing amount of calories.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, the first time when I come into Munising and I got into the hotel and I was getting ready for the shower, I said, oh man, you need to get some pizza and chicken wings. Where's the ice cream? And from that point on, I made a conscious effort to eat much more. And I mean, if you want to know, in the morning, I would normally have instant oatmeal, and I would load it up with sugar and dried fruit, of as much dried fruit as I could get into there. And then all through the day, I would eat snacks, mostly protein bars, but whatever else I could have for snacks. And then at dinner, I'd usually have instant rice or instant noodles and instant potatoes, and I would throw butter and jerky and whatever else I could throw in there to jack it up. And I was really trying to hit about 4,000 calories a day.
On January 21st in Alberta by Lance, it was 31 below. Where were you in mid-January?
So I was on that dog sled trail coming into Marquette, and that was actually the coldest night that I had on the trail. I was at Lakenin Land, if anybody knows where Lakenin Land is, and it's Tom Lakenin. I don't know him personally, but he is an amazing fellow from everybody that does know him. And he has a shelter for the North Country trail hikers on the trail. And so I was in Tom Lakenin's shelter, and there was an indoor-outdoor thermometer, and it read -10 degrees inside the cabin, and it said -21 degrees outside the cabin.
Well,
Think
some of
you'll
it-
walk that thing when the snow melts at all, or?
This trail?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I mean, I'm taking advantage of being up here right now, and I'm going to go hike the Trap Hills Thursday. Because I really felt bad about missing them, and as much as I was told it's impossible to ski, I was going to ski it anyway. Hell, it was impossible to ski, and I realized. But I've heard that it's just such a beautiful section of trail. I really feel bad missing it. I think it'll be rewarding to get out and see it.
How did you dry your gear if you got wet?
Oh gosh, this was a terrible thing. I would dry my gear by wearing it dry, and then some things got wet and I couldn't get them dry, and now they just become baggage until I could make it to town, and having some problems coming into Lance. I mean, I got to Lance and my hotel room looked like the inside of a dryer. Everything I owned had to be clean, but a sleeping bag had got wet, and I really think after analyzing it, hindsight, Monday morning quarterbacking it, I think what had happened is all my tent had got so wet in the blizzard that my tent had got my sleeping bag wet inside my pack, down sleeping bag. So it was not a good way to do this, I guess, and that ended up being quite a challenge.
Well, some of your pictures, well, a lot of them, I can see skiing tracks on ahead of you. But so I don't understand what that is, because you're making the track.
So what that is I just went through something that was something, and I turned around and took a picture of where I just came from.
Well, okay, I guess you make your skis go back the other way, okay. Because I can see your skis.
Oh.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Between Gunderkin Trailhead and Rockland, you were on a ski trail. Was that a snowmobile trail?
Snowmobile trail. Did I say ski trail? Snowmobile trail. No, there is no ski trail there. It felt like a ski trail because it was a snowmobile trail. I think it was the 13 or something, but yes.
hey, there is now.
Yeah, I skied it, and there was no snowmobiles on it, so. All right. Well, thanks for listening. And